group. They're based from RPISec. And then we also have a dedicated QA department. We use a lot of sophisticated tools and techniques because of the formal methods side of the organization. But a security audit does need to be done, and it needs to be done by a non-IOHK entity. So our preferred auditor is Kadelsky. We did reach out to them, and we had a conversation about when and how we can begin the audit. And we're already starting to space out components of the system that are ready for audit. Generally speaking, an audit does take about 3 to 6 weeks, depending upon resource availability. It can take a little longer. And then there's some notion of remediation of what's discovered in the audit. No matter how good you are, there's always something, because these are very complicated systems. It's not going to substantially slow us down, but it is something that you need to do because you need some independent assurance of what we've constructed is secure. We did this with Mantis. We also did this with the Cardano Rust client and Icarus, and we feel a moral obligation to also do this with the final version of Shelley. Are you going to have a team in Wyoming? Yes. That's actually why I went up to University of Wyoming. We will have a discussion about exactly what that team looks like and where that team's going to be. But we will have a team there. I think it's incredibly hard it's incredibly important when a politician passes a law to incorporating a shingle. You need to have substance in the jurisdiction. So to me, that means working with the local universities and working with the local developers and keeping people within the state, living in the state, paying taxes in the state. So we will have something there. How big? Well, that's up to the incentives. Five minutes left. We'll clip it at 2. Come on, guys. Give me something good. Did you name the wallet after the ship? No, we named Daedalus actually after Daedalus, the historical figure or mythological figure, the father of Icarus and the constructor of the maze. Charles, you believe Shelley on mainnet 2019? 100%. Again, I will eat my shoe if we don't ship that. In fact, you guys can even recommend what shoe you want me to eat. It can be a Sketcher, it can be a cowboy boot. Probably be easier to eat a cowboy boot. But I will eat it if we don't have it. All right. Well, nothing good is coming up. So that said, I guess we'll clip it here. All right. Thanks, everybody, for a great AMA. I had a lot of fun. I love doing these, and they're just really interesting. And it's always nice to talk to the community. And I'll try to do these more frequently, and I do hope that we can keep getting great questions. You've been a wonderful audience, and even Bogdan, I love all of you. So take care. Cheers. Hey, everybody. Charles Hoskinson here, live from warm, sunny Colorado. We have pretty good weather. Everything looks pretty green. I was driving around my land. I put a video up on Twitter about it. Being Twitter, of course, half the people commenting have to be shitty, but that's how social media works. And I'm starting to like it, actually. I'm starting to get used to it. Anyway, since I'm home and feeling better, I figure I'd start having more regular communication. There's also some news items and things like that coming down the pipe. So anyway, we just released the Stake Pool Operator Questionnaire. Let me bring it up real quickly. So you'll notice it's got a few different sections, from general information to information about yourself, server infrastructure. If you have a pre-existing business, if you're staking any other cryptocurrency, or you're running a mining pool or any of these things. And the purpose of this is basically just to get a pretty good understanding of who our audience happens to be. So when we launch the testnet, we'd like to populate the testnet with a group of people that really get cryptocurrencies, and they really get how to push things around and play around with the command line and understand how to change firewall configurations and all these types of things, instead of just the general public, because the point of this testnet is to verify that the things that we've constructed are working the way that we intended them to work. So the point of the questionnaire is to just get us an understanding of where the audience sits. It's also going to help us create content. So if the vast majority of people, for example, responding have used all the tools like Nix and Git and other things that we use, then we probably won't make video content. But if we notice that there are certain deficiencies, like how to report an issue on GitHub, for example, or how to use NixOps or these things, then what we'll do is coordinate with our partners and make some video content on YouTube specifically for these things. So if you're interested, I tweeted the link. The link will also be in this video. And if you're in the Telegram channel that I mentioned in my last AMA, these things will basically be sources for you to fill out that form. Let us know who you are. We'll take a subset of the people and bring them into some dedicated channel, talk with them. So we're still on schedule for looks like for the June launch of the self node, and we're right now building a YAML generator, and basically you can launch your own testnet in a box on your PC, and you can mine with it and do these things on your own version of Cardano. And this is a great way of getting an understanding of different configurations and basically how these things work on different operating systems, different hardware profiles, which is really the first step when you're launching a testnet. And it's really nice to get that feedback first. It also creates a nice communication pipeline for reporting issues and other concerns, and it kind of allows us to make sure that that's all smooth. The next step is the networked version, where everybody connects to the same testnet, and then that's going to look a lot more like what the mainnet's going to look like. And after we run that for a little bit, we'll add the incentives layer on it and reparameterize incentives accordingly. And then at some point, it'll get mature enough that we can flip a switch and it'll get to the mainnet side of things. So we're moving along. Things are looking good, guys. I'm really excited for it. Nope, was not bullied in school at all. Life is great for me. All right. That was a response to a comment in the live chat. So without further ado, let's get to the AMA. And it's a big bull day. So you know what that means. It means tomorrow's going to be a bear day. It's always like that in crypto. But as long as it's doing this, people seem to be happy. Sometimes they're not. All right. Well, hey, Rick, you're in the chat. Why don't you give me the first question? And we do have somebody, Pedro. Cooperation between Polymath and Cardano, Polymesh, when is expected to be ready? What's your perspective about security tokens? So, you know, one of the things that you do when you're an advisor is you advise. But as an advisor, you're not a decision maker. You're just providing advice. For example, if you retain a lawyer and you say, what should I do about this deal? The lawyer can tell you, well, here are the pros and the cons, and here's what I would recommend you do. But at the end of the day, it's always your responsibility. So with Polymath, my relationship is strictly to provide advice on how to build a blockchain, who to hire, the types of things that they would need to do to migrate from one system to another system, things about the tokenomics, things about how to be best for the stakeholders in their ecosystem. And of course, I'm going to say things like the things that I build are probably better than the things that people build, other people build on the market, if I honestly, legitimately believe that. And of course I do, or else why would I have built them? So yeah, I'll make my best effort to recommend the use of IOHK technology and products like Cardano where and when that makes sense. But at the end of the day, I have a fiduciary responsibility as a consultant to provide the best advice that I can give. And in some cases, that would mean that because certain things are further along or the roadmap is in a particular direction, it actually makes more sense to use something else. So For example, if they elect to stay on a layer 2 solution, given that they've written so much Solidity code, it does make a lot of sense for them to stay on Ethereum until Cardano can either support that or they're willing to do a port. And then it's a broader question of, well, does it make sense to port to another layer 2 solution, or does it make sense to deploy your own system? So these are the kinds of conversations we can have, and it's ultimately a strategic decision of the project. Where it benefits Cardano is it gives our organization a snapshot into what is the state of the art in the security token world. Where are the regulations at? What is the level of maturity in the environment, the ecosystem? What does the exchange infrastructure look like? And that's invaluable knowledge as we begin exploring security tokens on the Cardano side, especially in the developing world, where there's a ton of assets that are right now liquid. People want to create liquidity for them. So regardless if there's a direct relationship between Polymath and Cardano or not, however that ends up, there's going to be a kind of an indirect, tangential, synergistic value that we gain from this knowledge that we can then use for product development and for product strategy. And that's why it's good to talk to people. Okay. All right. Let me go through the list. Is there any support initiative for communities in Eastern Europe? You know, we have a strong presence in Ukraine. Actually, Roman Olenikov and his guys based in Kharkiv. And we also have some people that we talk to pretty regularly in Kiev. And I sometimes travel to Ukraine. We also have a lot of friends in Bulgaria and Romania and Hungary and other places. And I'm actually traveling to Georgia, the country, next month. I'll be meeting with the prime minister and a litany of ministers and going to wine country and having a lot of conversations. And we may have some good Cardano news coming out of that. So we'll see. But in general, that's actually a great area because there's just so many strong developers. There's very strong STEM education. There's a lot of outsourced developers there who really do like writing applications. And because the math education is so strong in Eastern Europe, when you talk about functional programming, they have a predisposed kind of admiration for Haskell and Lisp and OCaml and other such things. And generally they go to Java and C++ and Python and JavaScript out of necessity, where that's where the jobs are for outsourced development work. Whereas they'd actually much prefer to be writing things in Haskell or Scala or something like that. In fact, some of the best Scala developers we work with actually come from Poland. There's a firm called Scala C. So when we're talking about popularizing the push for Plutus and Marlow, those are great markets, and we're definitely going to go and explore them. Okay, what else we got here? Georgia, the country, not the girl. And the devil didn't go down to it. Scared by Facebook coin. You know, this is an interesting thing, this global coin, Facebook coin. Guys, you know, an asset-backed coin is nothing really scary for the cryptocurrency world. If anything, it's actually a value add to our entire ecosystem. You know, at the end of the day, there's going to be a large ecosystem of tokens and cryptocurrencies, if anything, because people just like them existing. Just like there's sports teams and just like there's all kinds of things that we prop up, they don't actually need a compelling market reason for things to exist. We may just like trading them. We just might like the game of winners and losers. It's entertainment for some people, and that alone is worth billions of dollars. But then when you talk about real life utilities being a store of value and these other things, you cannot make the argument that somehow Facebook pegging something to the US dollar and then bundling that into the Facebook Messenger is somehow some way going to destroy the entire cryptocurrency space. It's missing the entire point. Guys, if there is a centralized issuer and a central... Hey everybody, Charles Hoskinson here, live from warm, sunny Colorado. We have pretty good weather. Everything looks pretty green. I was driving around my land. I put a video up on Twitter about it. You know, being Twitter, of course, half the people commenting have to be shitty, but that's how social media works. And I'm starting to like it, actually. I'm starting to get used to it. Anyway, since I'm home and feeling better, I figure I'd start having more regular communication. There's also some news items and things like that coming down the pipe. So anyway, we just released a stake pool operator questionnaire. Let me bring it up real quickly. So you'll notice it's got a few different sections, from general information to information about yourself, server infrastructure. If you have a pre-existing business, if you're staking any other cryptocurrency, or you're running a mining pool, or any of these things. And the purpose of this is basically just to get a pretty good understanding of who our audience happens to be. So when we launch the testnet, we'd like to populate the testnet with a group of people that really get cryptocurrencies, and they really get how to push things around and play around with the command line and understand how to change firewall configurations and all these types of things, instead of just the general public, because the point of this testnet is to verify that the things that we've constructed are working the way that we intended them to work. So the point of the questionnaire is to just get us an understanding of where the audience sits. It's also going to help us create content. So if the vast majority of people, for example, responding have used all the tools like Nix and Git and other things that we use, then we probably won't make video content. But if we notice that there are certain deficiencies, like how to report an issue on GitHub, for example, or how to use NixOps or these things, then what we'll do is coordinate with our partners and make some video content on YouTube specifically for these things. So if you're interested, I tweeted the link. The link will also be in this video. And if you're in the Telegram channel that I mentioned in my last AMA, these things will basically be sources for you to fill out that form. Let us know who you are. We'll take a subset of the people and bring them into some dedicated channel, talk with them. So we're still on schedule for looks like for the June launch of the self node, and we're right now building a YAML generator, and basically you can launch your own testnet in a box on your PC, and you can mine with it and do these things on your own version of Cardano. And this is a great way of getting an understanding of different configurations and basically how these things work on different operating systems, different hardware profiles, which is really the first step when you're launching a testnet. And it's really nice to get that feedback first. It also creates a nice communication pipeline for reporting issues and other concerns. And it kind of allows us to make sure that that's all smooth. The next step is the networked version, where everybody connects to the same testnet. And then that's going to look a lot more like what the mainnet's going to look like. And after we run that for a little bit, we'll add the incentives layer on it and reparameterize incentives accordingly. And then at some point, it'll get mature enough that we can flip a switch and it'll get to the mainnet side of things. So we're moving along. Things are looking good, guys. I'm really excited for it. I nope, was not bullied in school at all. Life is great for me. All right. That was a response to a comment in the live chat. So without further ado, let's get to the AMA. And it's a big bull day. So you know what that means? It means tomorrow's going to be a bear day. It's always like that in crypto. But as long as it's doing this, people seem to be happy. Sometimes they're not. All right. Well, hey, Rick, you're in the chat. Why don't you give me the first question? And we do have somebody, Pedro. Cooperation between Polymath and Cardano, Polymesh, when is expected to be ready? What's your perspective about security tokens? So, one of the things that you do when you're an advisor is you advise. But as an advisor, you're not a decision maker. You're just providing advice. For example, if you retain a lawyer and you say, what should I do about this deal? The lawyer can tell you, well, here are the pros and the cons, and here's what I would recommend you do. But at the end of the day, it's always your responsibility. So with Polymath, my relationship is strictly to provide advice on how to build a blockchain, who to hire, the types of things that they would need to do to migrate from one system to another system, things about the tokenomics, things about how to be best for the stakeholders in their ecosystem. And of course, I'm going to say things like the things that I build are probably better than the things that other people build on the market, if I honestly, legitimately believe that. And of course I do, or else why would I have built them? So yeah, I'll make my best effort to recommend the use of IOHK technology and products like Cardano where and when that makes sense. But at the end of the day, I have a fiduciary responsibility as a consultant to provide the best advice that I can give. And in some cases, that would mean that because certain things are further along or the roadmap is in a particular direction, it actually makes more sense to use something else. For example, if they like to stay on a layer 2 solution, given that they've written so much Solidity code, it does make a lot of sense for them to stay on Ethereum until Cardano can either support that or they're willing to do a port. And then it's a broader question of, well, does it make sense to port to another layer 2 solution, or does it make sense to deploy your own system? So these are the kinds of conversations we can have, and it's ultimately a strategic decision of the project. Where it benefits Cardano is it gives our organization a snapshot into what is the state of the art in the security token world. Where are the regulations at? What is the level of maturity in the environment, the ecosystem? What does the exchange infrastructure look like? And that's invaluable knowledge as we begin exploring security tokens on the Cardano side, especially in the developing world, where there's a ton of assets that are right now liquid. People want to create liquidity for them. So regardless if there's a direct relationship between Polymath and Cardano or not, however that ends up, there's going to be a kind of an indirect, tangential, synergistic value that we gain from this knowledge that we can then use for product development and for product strategy. And that's why it's good to talk to people. Okay. All right. Let me go through the list. Is there any support initiative for communities in Eastern Europe? You know, we have a strong presence in Ukraine. Actually, Roman Olenikov and his guys based in Kharkiv. And we also have some people that we talk to pretty regularly in Kiev. And I sometimes travel to Ukraine. We also have a lot of friends in Bulgaria and Romania and Hungary and other places. And I'm actually traveling to Georgia, the country, next month. I'll be meeting with the prime minister and a litany of ministers and going to wine country and having a lot of conversations. And we may have some good Cardano news coming out of that. So we'll see. But in general, that's actually a great area because there's just so many strong developers. There's very strong STEM education. There's a lot of outsourced developers there who really do like writing applications. And because the math education is so strong in Eastern Europe, when you talk about functional programming, they have a predisposed kind of admiration for Haskell and Lisp and OCaml and other such things. And generally they go to Java and C++ and Python and JavaScript out of necessity, where that's where the jobs are for outsourced development work. Whereas they'd actually much prefer to be writing things in Haskell or Scala or something like that. In fact, some of the best Scala developers we work with actually come from Poland. There's a firm called Scala C. So when we're talking about popularizing the push for Plutus and Marlow, those are great markets, and we're definitely going to go and explore them. Okay, what else we got here? Georgia, the country, not the girl. And the devil didn't go down to it. Scared by Facebook coin. You know, this is an interesting thing, this global coin, Facebook coin. Guys, an asset-backed coin is nothing really scary for the cryptocurrency world. If anything, it's actually a value add to our entire ecosystem. At the end of the day, there's going to be a large ecosystem of tokens and cryptocurrencies, if anything, because people just like them existing. Just like there's sports teams and just like there's all kinds of things that we prop up, they don't actually need a compelling market reason for things to exist. We may just like trading them. We just might like the game of winners and losers. It's entertainment for some people, and that alone is worth billions of dollars. But then when you talk about real life utilities being a store of value and these other things, you cannot make the argument that somehow Facebook pegging something to the US dollar and then bundling that into the Facebook Messenger is somehow some way going to destroy the entire cryptocurrency space. It's missing the entire point. Guys, if there is a centralized issuer and a centralized actor controlling something, that is not a cryptocurrency. That is not what we're about. The whole reason Bitcoin exists is to get away from these types of things. The entire reason the cryptocurrency space exists is to get away from these types of things. Now, if I was JP Morgan or Wells Fargo or Bank of America, I'd be scared shitless about this, because functionally what it is a better way to do banking in a regulated environment. And it is something that wouldn't, if it takes off, could kill the entire order of correspondent bank relationships. So that's certainly a scary thought for the legacy world and the incumbents, and Facebook has a chance of eating their lunch, but by no means is it going to harm or damage the cryptocurrency space. In fact, if it's designed correctly, it could replace the tethers of the world with something a bit more stable and really help decentralized exchanges and really help the people who don't want to touch the fiat space but still want to digitize. So I don't view them as a threat or a competitor, and I think people who do just don't understand what cryptocurrencies are all about and our industry is all about. And that's okay. There are people who didn't understand what the internet was about, like Paul Krugman, who also doesn't understand what cryptocurrencies are about. And what he famous quote he said is that the economic impact of the internet will be equivalent to or less than the fax machine. So maybe if you disagree with Paul, you can send him a fax. He probably still has one. And if you disagree with me, well then send me some Facebook coin. Yes, we are releasing testnet in June for the self node. General Zod, how long after the final release of Shelley do you see smart contracts being implemented and used? So we're actually starting to do actually have people write smart contracts, give us feedback about smart contracts. And so part of the strategy is just hackathon, and introducing to the functional programming world. The reality is that the imperative world has been captured by Ethereum, but the functional world is completely up for grabs, and that's a big world. There are hundreds of thousands of developers that are familiar with functional programming tools, techniques, and that you see them at conferences like Strange Loop and ICFP and Lambda Jam and all these things all around. In fact, if you doubt me, just go to meetup.com and do searches for Scala, Haskell, Clojure, OCaml, and just look at the top meetup groups and how many members they have. You can just do a count and you start realizing that there's a very large community here. And by and large, they're just sitting on the sidelines. So the most experienced, deepest computer science knowledge, generally the best engineers in the entire space, all of programming, are just sitting on the sidelines, can't use their knowledge and their tools and their techniques in the cryptocurrency space. They're forced to use things that look like JavaScript, but worse. So I don't think it's a really good idea to say, oh, let's just keep them on the sidelines and force them to continue going down that road for the sake of interoperability. It's a good idea to just micro-target them, go after them, capture them, get 500 to 1,000 really good people, and have them go do stuff and build stuff that really shows the power of the platform. And then once you have that core, then people start getting an idea, well, what is the system all about? And then you add interoperability, then you start growing. You see, at the end of the day, Vitalik and others like Gav Wood, but Vitalik in particular, have been brutally criticized by the mistakes of other people. So you look at the DAO hack, for example, there's nothing technically wrong with EVM or Solidity that actually resulted in the DAO hack. The problem is that the language was designed in such a permissive way that it was easy for people who didn't know what they were doing to make mistakes. And when those people made mistakes, people didn't just blame those people. When the DAO hack occurred, people didn't just say, oh, well, it's the DAO hacker and the Slockit coders. They said, no, it's Ethereum that's at fault. It's Vitalik who's at fault. They got a very bad brand and reputation from that to this day still hurts them. And it makes people question about security. So it's super important that when you first launch something and you bring it out into the mainstream, that you make sure that you bring your A team, your A game, or else people's perceptions will set. And as a consequence, some people may screw up and drag the entire brand into the dark pits. So our view has always been start small, start methodical, and get some great ideas out there, get some great apps out there, and then get some momentum from that, and then open up interoperability, and then the floodgates open. The brand's already set, the marketing's already set, the community's already set. There's going to be a core group of very experienced people that can answer questions and really get the underlying technology and really fanatically believe in the underlying technology. So when those newer people come in, they're not left to their own devices. They have mentors. There's people who can answer questions on Stack Exchange. There are already libraries that are constructed, lots of good ideas that are sitting there. So that's a different growth model, but I think there's a population to draw from. There's a demand for this, and the excitement we get when we talk about these things at functional programming conferences and when we do the hackathons is a good indicator that we're going to get that core group of elite people to get things going. And Pluto's pretty mature at this point. Things are looking really nice. We're at the point where we're doing fine details, and they're evolving quickly. In fact, right now, today, you can actually use Plutus with Plutus Playground. You can take courses on Plutus on Udemy, and a hackathon will eventually be coming near you. Yeah, that's a good point. Wasn't DAO created or audited by the best Solidity developers at that time? And that is the fair criticism of Ethereum as a platform. If your best still can't deliver something great, then there's fundamental issues with your design. But you got to understand something. Solidity is divorced from all the tools, techniques, methodologies of let's say, mature ecosystems like C or something, because it's new. Whereas Plutus is not. You can reuse 30 years of great knowledge, tooling techniques from the Haskell world with Plutus development. So you can get much higher reliability code. And we don't have to go and reinvent the wheel. We don't have to go and build 30 years worth of tools. James, good to see that you're in the chat. And Lars with excellent Malta. That's good to hear. Yeah, he had a lot of friends, and Lara was there too. And hey, Gabe, Alpha, 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 Alpha. Yeah, Gabe Abed runs one of the most interesting channels in the cryptocurrency space, the Gabby's Alpha channel, and it's got all the cryptocurrency CEOs in it. I think he even has a token associated with it. It's a pretty cool channel. And Gabe's one of the best entrepreneurs in the space, a good friend too. He started Bit, and to this date, I think he's the only one of us who actually managed to get a central bank to issue a currency. Okay, let's see here. Hello from Japan. I will be in Japan, funny man. I'll be in Japan June 8th to the 13th, I believe, flying to Tokyo. So I'm speaking at a big conference. It's not a cryptocurrency conference, but it's going to be a lot of fun. It's kind of like a digital world conference or something. Waiichi, who's from the Asahi, invited me to speak. And so that's going to be a fun event. You might run into me. I think I'm doing a meetup group or something like that too. And thank you, Netherlands. We have a great community out there. Okay. Charles, I'm new to this space, but I want to learn Ada. Charles, what language do you suggest I start working with? Well, Billy, what's your computer science experience? And as soon as you answer, I'll give you some advice. Okay, what do we got here? Rick, it looks like we're going to miss each other. To what degree has IOHK and the Cardano Foundation communicated with U.S. financial regulatory committees? Where do you stand on U.S. regulated engagements, relocating its core business to Wyoming? Yeah, Michael, the reality is Cardano is an unregulated product, although certain uses of Cardano could become regulated or are regulated depending upon jurisdictions. So I personally do talk to U.S. regulators. I talked to some people from the CFTC, for example, when I was in New York. And through the people I work with, we have a considerable amount of organizational knowledge we've gained, whether it be through the Berkman Klein Center at Harvard or FS Vector or others, about where does U.S. policy sit for all of the regulatory agencies, not just one particular one. For example, we think a lot about securities regulation, but you also have to think about FinCEN. You have to think about the IRS, certainly CFTC, and these other entities. And they're smaller, or in some cases, they have different mandates, but those mandates may inadvertently trip up with the use of cryptocurrencies. So generally speaking, regulation comes into play when you're holding something on behalf of somebody else. You're a middleman where the system doesn't operate without you being involved in that. For example, you're a transaction relay or something like that, where there's no other way to do it without your presence. When you're making promises and people are making financial commitments based upon those promises. For example, I say, if you invest in my company, I'll give you this return, or these things. And there's all kinds of different things like the Howey test and other such things that you can use to understand where you generally fall. The problem is that U.S. regulation is very primitive, and that it was the first, and so it's got a lot of case law, and it's very draconian and Byzantine and serpentine. And it's really difficult to understand where you fit. It would be much better if it was functional, where you'd say, here's a clear collection of tests, you can easily apply them. Then if you think you're in violation or you need to be regulated, run the test, it'll give you an answer, and then you can go to the agency and say, well, I ran them, and give me a clarity, give me a no action letter or an exemption or something like that. It'd be much easier if we had functional regulation, and much easier if we had an ability to directly communicate with the regulator and get certainty with them. The challenge is that when a regulator gives you certainty, in some cases that becomes a precedent that gets set for other actors. And as a consequence, it makes them, unless they're willing to move lockstep for an entire industry, hesitant to make broad proclamations about whether something is a security or not a security, or how something should be taxed, because then it kind of removes their moral mandate to enforce in the future, unless they're absolutely sure they want to go down that road. Whereas other regulators, like Switzerland, for example, are perfectly comfortable in many cases with giving case-by-case rulings, and that's basically the standard. For example, with Ethereum, we actually got a tax ruling from the canton of Zug. We just simply said, hey, this is what we're doing. Tell us how we're going to be taxed. And the canton said, this is the way it is. We said, great. And it only took a few weeks. And when they stamped it, it was actually legally binding. So they couldn't retroactively go back and say, well, that's not what we meant, and cancel the whole thing out. So we definitely do talk to regulators, not just within the United States. Cardano is a global product, and IOHK is a global business. We operate in almost 20 countries at this point. And it's an ongoing conversation and dialogue. And there's, the other problem is politics change. The 2020 election is going to have a huge impact on the regulatory direction that the United States goes into. So far, the Trump administration has been very laid back with regulation, and in many cases, anti-government with regulation. So they put people into power who really just don't want to either make new rules or getting rid of old rules, or they're just delaying and waiting things out. This is especially apparent with EPA, but on the financial regulatory side, we've also seen the same thing. Should the Democrats win in 2020, there's a very strong possibility they're going to put people in, mostly from Wall Street, because they have a history of this, who will probably be anti-crypto. In fact, had Hillary Clinton won, the people that she was thinking about putting into the Securities Exchange Commission and other regulatory bodies were not pro-crypto. They were quite the opposite. So the very same people who say crypto is a scam, crypto should be banned, crypto is diminishing the power of the U.S. government, could inadvertently now be in charge of the agencies that regulate things. And because there's no legislation that explicitly regulates cryptocurrency and constrains these regulatory bodies, should the leadership change, these regulatory bodies may become very hostile to crypto. It's almost to looking at the political spectrum, drug policy. For example, when George Bush was president, and to a certain extent under the Justice Department under the prior Attorney General, there was a very strong anti-drug push within the United States. A lot of people were thrown into jail. At the same time, there was a big push for medical marijuana and the decriminalization of marijuana. So you started having this issue where the states were at direct conflict with the federal government. And something very similar may end up happening over the next 5 years to 10 years, where the federal government becomes anti-crypto, but then the state governments are increasingly becoming pro-crypto. The state of Colorado's passed legislation. The state of Montana is looking at legislation. Wyoming has already passed a lot of legislation. And if enough states pass legislation, this will inevitably affect U.S. federal policy. But I'm not going to lie, it's certainly clear that bigger financial institutions are starting to understand that cryptocurrencies are going to have a significant impact on their existing business model. And these large financial institutions will do what they always do, try to buy politicians and try to buy regulation so that basically their competition gets regulated out of existence and they can maintain a state-sponsored monopoly. It's another reason why cryptocurrencies exist. And this is already a global market. It's already huge, and it's going to be very difficult for people, even if they shut the US markets down, to shut down the cryptocurrency space. We're already too big. The cat's already out of the bag. IOHK is a software company. We build software. We don't do investment banking. We don't do private placements and sell lots of things. And we don't do any of those things, especially not within the United States. And so unless the US government starts saying that software is now going to be regulated differently, which is certainly a possibility, but it would it really have constitutional implications, especially with the First Amendment. I don't think that regulation is very significant for us. That said, things change and elections happen, laws get passed, and every now and then constitutional crises occur. And we work our way through those where and when they make sense. All right. Billy Ferguson, I have no computer language. I'm just starting out. I'm so shocked you're answering me. Thank you, sir. All right. Well, if you're starting from the very beginning, what my recommendation would be is go to Coursera, and they have a Fundamentals of Computing course series. I think it's from Rice University or something like that. And it's maybe 6 or 7 classes, and it's taught in Python. So I'd recommend looking at that and going through that entire course series. Harvard University on edX also took their CS50 class, which is their Introduction to Computer Science class. And that course is also free. So those are 2 really, really good resources. And they'll take about 6 months to get through end to end. At that point, you'll know enough to be dangerous, and you'll have a basic understanding of what is a programming language, how to write code, some understanding of algorithms and data structures. And you'll be in a really good position to then move on to the next stage of your pedagogy, which is functional programming. And probably the best way to enter that is through a book called The Haskell Book. It's about 1,000 pages long, and it does a very comprehensive deep dive into Haskell. The other option is to go through a more traditional pedagogy, which is called SICP, the Structure Interpretation of Computer Programs, which is written in Lisp. So both these routes are very good routes going into the functional programming world, and that'll take another 6 months. It takes about a year to learn enough where you can actually do some reasonable things. You won't be a professional developer, but you'll at least understand enough to communicate with professional developers and be able to do some interesting things. And if you're interested in actually pursuing a degree in computer science, you're based in the United States, there's a really good online program that Regis has, which you probably could get through quickly and get a bachelor's in computer science. There's also the nano degree programs that Udacity has. Is it a patented? No. Again, that ruins the entire point. Hi, Charles. Will sharding be applied in the Cardano project? Yes, there will be some notion of it. We call it Ouroboros Hydra. And basically, there's kind of 2 dimensions you can go. One is sharding layer 1. One is applying layer 2 solutions. These are bundling or batching or lightning style stuff. Rob Cohen is our Lightning product manager, so he's exploring that direction. We're looking at snarks and starks and these other things, and that's Markov Koweis's job. So that's what's happening in layer 2. We're also looking at MPC for smart contracts, and obviously the sidechains research line allows interoperability with other systems, so you can push work to those systems. And then on the layer 1 side, Hydra is underway. So we have a backlog of Ouroboros stuff to do. We're rewriting all the Ouroboros papers for a journal submission. That's nearly done. We're also looking at some cleanup. In particular, we're looking at reducing issues with dishonest spikes of dishonest majority. And so there's some more theory that has to be done at the base level. And the immediate next project is Ouroboros Hydra. So that's a summer project, and as we exit the summer, it'll be done. we'll be in a good position to begin implementation work. And because we've rewritten all the code and we have new processes and everything, we can just immediately move the team that finishes Shelley onto that, and they'll be able to launch that significantly faster than it took to get to Shelley. It's nice having low technical that you can just move so quickly. What is the education path to learn how to run a node from scratch? We're likely either going to make some YouTube videos, or we're going to go ahead and do something involving a course, like a Udemy course. At the very least, there'll be a few YouTube videos. The exact videos that we do, is just dependent on the kinds of questions we keep getting over and over and over again with the stake pool task force and the community as a whole. Certain people probably shouldn't run full nodes at some point, especially if you just don't have a stable computer, or you're like only maybe have a cell phone or a laptop. Well, you're not really set up for that. And then furthermore, maybe you just don't have the patience or the technical skills. So our hope is to produce some sort of filter where there's a course or content. Is if this makes sense to you, you can do it. If it doesn't make sense to you, well, you have to reassess whether you want to invest the time for this or not. But it's not hard to make that content. It's something you can do pretty quickly, like we did with the Udemy courses for Plutus and Marlowe. When will Ledger X support arrive? I asked my director of operations about this today, and what we're basically doing is having a conversation with Vacuum Labs about it, and we'll get back to you guys. But I don't think it would be super hard, since we already have the Nano S support. There's just a few little things that have to be done. So it's going to be one of those Yoroi Vacuum Labs, so Emergo Vacuum Labs deals, but obviously considerably faster than it took to get Ledger support. So my hope is sometime next month, but we'll find out. The other thing is that I'd really like to do multi-sig with Ledger devices, especially for people who have large holdings. So it'd be nice to have a cell phone app, a Ledger Nano X, and basically have a copay-like multi-sig experience. So we've been having some discussions around what it would take to get there, and that's a launch requirement for Shelley. Multi-sig is required for Shelley. What are your thoughts on Casper Labs? Vlad is an interesting guy. I was actually the guy who hired Vlad when I was at Ethereum, and Vlad and I never agreed on anything. He's kind of a cynic. He's always been Vlad to me. We've run into each other throughout the years, and if all my critics were like Vlad, I'd be a lot happier and my life would be a lot better. At least I'd be able to have a conversation with them and we'd be civil. And of course we disagree, but we're not disagreeable in the process. Casper Labs is just a good reflection of what happens when you get an ecosystem that gets very large. You start having people who have divergent paths, and inevitably they start executing on those divergent paths. It's a consequence of success. If you have a Bitcoin, you will eventually have a Bitcoin Cash. If you have an Ethereum, you'll eventually have an Ethereum Classic, because something's going to come up. And at some point we're going to have a Cardano Cash or a Cardano Classic, because somebody's going to disagree with what the community wants to do and take it in that particular direction. And that's okay. It's a good thing. It's a bad thing when you have an endless series of them, and every time they happen, they take 50% of your population. You have this exponential decrease in fragmentation. That's what happened to the NXT community. They just couldn't agree, and they split into all these tribes, and they became many different projects like Crypti and Lisk and Waves and so forth, which is really sad, because NXT actually had some good ideas. It doesn't matter what you say. Vlad loves to disagree. Yeah, there are some people like that. And I wish him well. I really do hope Casper Labs ships something interesting. Because, anytime someone does something interesting, we get to read it, we get to look at it, and we get to borrow from it if there's some good idea there, as long as they're following an open source ethos. I, generally speaking, do not have issues with people that are open source, and they allow us to use the things that they build. Because, even if they have 10 bad ideas, if they have one good idea, it might end up being a good idea we could take and put into our system. And it helps all of you guys. right, let's look for a good one. Okay. Let's see your website hosting. Hi from Portugal. Hello, Portugal. We have a lot of people from Brazil at IOHK, so we do speak Portuguese from time to time. But Brazilian Portuguese is a little bit different. It's a bit more flavorful. But I always say obrigado. All right. I need a new shirt. The one you have on will likely scare off a horse. Well, this is a rancher shirt, kids. Can't have. Hi, Charles. Is it true that Cardano has a kill switch programmed into it, whereas it can be shut down in case of worldwide emergency? No, we do not have a kill switch. There is one thing that I had put into Cardano. The IOHK ADA is actually unspendable. We put some stuff into to the protocol for that. Had we had full smart contract support, we would have written a vesting smart contract, but because we didn't, we just made it unspendable, which is actually why it's so incredibly ironic when I hear people run around and say, oh, well, Charles is flying all around the world selling his ADA to finance his lifestyle. Well, we haven't sold any because we can't. We can't even move it from the wallet that it's currently in. So, that is what it is, right? What solutions are coming for people to feel safer holding ADA? That's a good question. As with all things, there are various levels. So the very first thing that I would recommend doing is using some form of a hardware wallet if you're really paranoid. So Ledger Nano S, and I think we have Trezor support as well, and others are coming on, are very powerful. The other option you have is a paper wallet. Now, in both cases, the advantage is that the keys are cold. Those private keys never get exposed to a device that's connected to the internet. It is just a question of which one do you trust more. With a paper wallet, there's a generation process and there's a printing process. Now, the generation's in memory, so if it's generated on a device that's not connected to the internet, or it's a pretty safe device, and the printer is not a public printer, it's probably okay. But be aware that the printer buffer actually can possess the paper wallet blueprint to reprint out, which is why we segregated the keywords so that you have to write by hand a subset of those keywords. I think it's 27 and 18 are printed and 9 are written by hand. So it does provide some degree of protection from that. In the case of the hardware wallet, you're trusting the company that manufactured the hardware wallet not to have mistakes or issues. So using a hardware wallet from a reputable vendor that has third-party auditing and it's been on market for a while and a lot of people have put money into, thereby giving hackers an incentive to attack it, is probably a good first step. Nothing is permanently secure. There's all kinds of things that can happen. You can lose the device can be destroyed, the wallet can be burned, which is why it's probably a good idea to have a backup. Once we have multi-sig come, then what you can do is double down on your security. For example, if you have a lot of ADA, it's probably good to have a 2 of 3 multi-sig on hardware wallet devices, and then put one of those multi-sig devices in, let's say, a safety deposit box at your bank as a backup. You keep one, and maybe you give one to a friend who can keep it secure. So even if your house gets broken into or you get compromised, that person would not be able to spend. And then furthermore, you'd also have, your multi-sig in a safety deposit box, so you can of course go there. If you don't have a friend you trust, open up 2 bank accounts in 2 separate organizations and have 2 safety deposit boxes and put them there. That's really secure, and I've never heard of anybody who's ever done that having a problem. The inconvenience is that you'd have to go and drive to the bank to spend your ADA. But then again, if you're not doing that frequently, this is a cold store for long-term storage, probably a good way of doing that. And then, of course, you can learn how to write smart contracts, and you can write all kinds of logic. Like you can make the tokens unspendable for a while. A Mantis Daedalus shaped cold storage wallet would be a cool idea. Well, on the Daedalus side, we are going to upgrade Daedalus at some point, Cardano wallet at some point, to allow you to manage accounts, but not have the private keys. So basically, the idea is you can connect a ledger device or you can connect a paper wallet, and it will be able to observe the balance of those mediums. But you would not be able to actually spend from the Daedalus interface without actually connecting the device to the wallet, to the Daedalus wallet. And then the other side of that is having maybe trusted hardware support. So we have examined separating the crypto. We call this in the Rust client secure enclave, and then compiling the crypto core to run in Intel SGX. And we're also looking at a solution called Zymbit, Zymbit. In both those cases, your key management is now done in a trusted hardware enclave, one that comes pre-built into the computer. The other one can be a device you connect to the computer. And so then all your key management, key signing, these capabilities would be physically segregated into a different operating system, almost like Samsung Knox is to Android on the device. So the advantage there would be that even if your OS was compromised, or you had malware, or a remote user had somehow had access and they could read and see things, the physical separation of the hardware and the operating system would prevent that from breaching that enclave and being able to steal your funds. But it's important to point out that more often than not, private key theft is actually one of the least effective ways of getting people's cryptocurrency. Usually what ends up happening is either there's a hacking, where basically people using some sort of send you Ether back or something like that, or hey, like a friend emails you and says, hey, I'm stuck somewhere, can you send me a Bitcoin, because their account has been compromised. And that usually is where people end up losing their money, is they voluntarily actually give the funds to someone else. So your insulation against those types of social attacks is, generally speaking, if someone is asking you for help, don't do it until you physically talk to them on the phone, better yet over a VoIP connection. Then at the very least, they might still be trying to defraud you because maybe they've been compromised, but more often than not, it will protect you from an account. Another thing is to follow like a 48, 72-hour rule, where you say, oh, okay, I'll give it to you, but I'll give it to you next week. Nothing is so urgent that people need crypto now. If you can meet people in person and assess them, that's even better. But that's just common sense, right? Yeah, Tron should have definitely used Mantis. But, it is what it is. Hi, Charles. You mentioned you have chickens on your ranch. Do you sell them, and how many do you have? No, they're egg chickens, so I have them for eggs. I have 11 chickens. I bought more than 11, but a few of them died because we raised them from chicks, and that always happens no matter how careful you are. Chickens are pretty fragile when they're first born. And we got 2 geese to guard the chickens, and we're just about done with the chicken coop, and very soon we'll have fresh eggs because I love omelets. Win Gulfstream G650 landing script in your front yard. Here's what really rich people do if they go down that road. You don't put a landing strip, you put a helipad, because you keep your plane ideally at a nice hangar at a nice airport where it can be maintained and serviced. And when you want to fly on your plane, you have the helicopter pick you up from your place and take you to the airport, because helicopters go like 200 miles an hour. Even if you live in the mountains, it doesn't take very long to get to your jet, like 20 minutes or 30 minutes from the nearest airport. The only reason you'd have an airstrip on your land is if you're like a drug lord or you live on just an insanely remote area where even a helicopter would take a while to get to another airstrip. But I live in Colorado. There's no area so remote. I feel like you're not working. Every day I see you posting memes on Twitter instead of getting Shelly out. You're always criticizing Vitalik, but Vitalik has a product out. I feel you're a phony that talks. Question mark. Well, are you questioning your own statement? I mean, come on, Anthony. You gotta tell me how you really feel. Okay, what should I be doing? Should I be writing code? If so, what code? If so, what repo? Where should I be? What should I be doing? Come on, Anthony, tell me. How should I be running my company? We have 200 people. We have revenue. We're all around the world signing agreements with heads of state, talking to people. But I guess you're the expert. Thank you, keyboard warrior. And it does bring up a broader point of people's perceptions of people in power and what they do. My job is to be the guy who knows where to go and rally the people and get them to go there. It's not my job to clear the brush, build the roads, and get into the nuts and bolts of the mechanics. If you get an engineer, you put them into a position of power. A lot of them fail in those positions of power because they don't know how to delegate and they don't know how to actually be a CEO. They demote themselves to lead engineer or lead technical architect. And every time a problem happens, instead of trusting somebody to solve that problem, they do it themselves. It's a really bad situation. I see it over and over again in an organization. Well, then you ask yourself, well, then how do you ever have a weekend or go to a conference and talk to your competitors and see where they're going? You don't have time for any of that because you're writing code. You don't have time for any of that because you're fixing the product when the product's broken. I'm very glad I have David Esser as a senior product manager on Cardano because he shows up for all the meetings I used to have to go to. And instead of having to go to 6 meetings or 7 meetings a week, now I go to 1 or 2. And that means I save 5 hours every single week that I can now spend thinking about who should we partner with or who should we talk to. What new products should my company build? How do we make more revenue for the company so I keep the lights on and put more money into R&D and more money into hiring better coders? And as for Vitalik having a product, yeah, he started long before I did. Started in 2014. We do have a product. It's called Byron. It's been in market since September of 2017. What the fuck have you been paying attention to? There's multiple wallets, many, many papers, test nets galore, new one launching in June. What more do you want? You want to know, even if we had, let's say, Shelly in market, then it'd be like, well, why is your market cap lower than Ethereum? And then let's say we're eclipse Ethereum. Why is your market cap lower than Bitcoin? And let's say we eclipse Bitcoin. Then it's, what's the next thing that's going to come and kill you? Aren't you worried about Facebook coin? So you can never make these people happy. Because at the end of the day, they're either criticizing you because there's something else they like more than what you have, in which case you're never going to win. They don't like you for some reason. Maybe they don't like the way I talk or the way I look, or they think I'm a bad actor, or they lost money because the market collapsed. And in their view, the product is not successful unless they're making a fortune and driving a Lamborghini. So it's just noise, and it's noise that's amplified by social media, and it's noise that's amplified by confirmation bias. You see the things you want to see. If you're my friend and supporter, you say, wow, Charles is getting healthier. He's driving his ATV around his ranch. He's relaxing. This is great for the project. It means that he's going to have more energy and be more vibrant to come up with great ideas. And if you don't like me, you say, wow, Charles is squandering money he probably stole from old people in Japan. Look at this article, that's slander written by this one guy 3 years ago that's just filled with lies that I don't even bother to validate. Same piece of news, but 2 completely different ways of seeing it. It's the same with the MetaMask, do you know who I am tweet. I've talked about that ad nauseum, and there are still people today, mostly in the Ethereum ecosystem, a few in the EOS ecosystem, but mostly Ethereum, who basically use that as an indictment of character. They say, oh, well, this must be how Charles acts everywhere. So they wouldn't be surprised if somebody had a hidden camera and saw me at a hotel and I'm checking in. If they tell me my room is not available yet, that they would put money on the table that I would just blow up and yell at the hotel clerk. Or if I'm at a restaurant and they forgot the side of bacon, that I'd blow up and yell at the waitress or something like that. They would put money on the table 10 times out of 10 for it, because of one tweet, because they think that tweet means that's Charles Hoskinson, that's his character, that's who he is. There's no empathy, there's no understanding. They just collapse the entire thing down. You know, I work probably 80 to 100 hours a week, and it's this intermittent intervals of work. I'm at dinners, I get a message, I have to take a call. I'm sitting in an airport waiting for a flight. You know, there's something comes up, I have to type an email, almost miss boarding because I have to get it through. There's hundreds of those situations. There's also lots of downtime where you're just waiting. You know, I can't do anything at this point, make the developers write code faster. I can't do anything at this point to get something to release one day sooner. I could go and try to write code myself, even if I had the inclination to do so. It'd probably just slow things down. Just like hiring a new developer would slow things down. You have the best developer in the world. You put them on a new project. It takes them a few months to integrate correctly and become productive and not slow people down. So in some cases, I'm waiting as much as everybody else is waiting. And there's not much more I can do. So I choose to spend my time thinking about things, reading books, doing other things. Because in the process of doing that, it gives you creativity, gives you the ability to imagine things differently, gives you the ability to relate with people that you couldn't relate with before. And ultimately, that's what makes great products. One of the reasons Steve Jobs was so good at doing things on the Apple side is because he took a calligraphy class, you know, at university. You know, he did all kinds of strange things, had all kinds of strange hobbies, and that knowledge synergistically helped him think about products in a different way, which ultimately made those products more successful. So all great CEOs have to have a work-life balance, and all great CEOs have to have a variety of different interests that inspire them to think differently about where products need to go and how to build products. And you're going to be criticized relentlessly no matter what you do. Anytime you're doing anything that involves politics, money, anytime you're doing anything that involves any modicum of human opinion, whether it be where to put the stop sign, where to put the speed bump, to all the way to how to lead a country, you're going to be the subject to enormous amounts of criticism over a long spectrum. And people are just going to say things that are just blatantly false, provably false. All the time, people keep saying we're selling our ADA. Anytime anybody can go to our blog and see the address where our ADA is sitting, we can't even spend it at the moment. It's not possible. Yet people say it over and over and over and over again. And that's more of an indictment of themselves. It's more of an indictment of how social media works. And it's more of an indictment of just of how people think. At the end of the day, these people have no power. These people are ultimately not going to influence whether we're successful or not. They're just trolls. And so when you start looking at them that way, life gets better. I'm actually 31, not 33. Aren't you afraid that these kinds of videos will someday be used against you? Elon Musk doesn't do videos like these. Maybe he should. He runs publicly traded companies, so that does create some complications. But at the end of the day, the deep fake revolution is coming. Guys, within the next 10 years, AI is going to advance to the point where you can take a video of a person, and base for that video. And what that functionally means is that you can have things that look real that are completely made up. So you'll be able to take a video of Trump or Obama and have Obama say, "I hate Jews," or Trump saying, like, kill all the minorities," or something like that. And it'll come out and look exactly like him, exactly as if he said it. We're moving to a reality that's becoming almost post-truth. It's something we're not prepared for as a society, because at the same time, you have these hypersensitive people who somehow are so good at playing the social media game that anytime you say anything that offends someone, you're now at risk of being pushed out of your job. You're now at risk of being demonized or dogpiled. People say stupid stuff all the time. I'm king of it. I saw that firsthand with the "Do you know who I am?" tweet in Vietnam. I was in Vietnam, not feeling very good. We had a product launching next week. I was a little worried that we might not be self-important, that we can't talk to each other privately. I have on my Rolodex most of the CEOs of the cryptocurrency space. I just didn't have the communication channel with MetaMask built. And you'd figure since we're both in the same industry, we should have that. And being denied that pissed me off. I wasn't feeling very good. I say one thing, and now it's jaded my character according to a huge group of people in the Ethereum ecosystem. So yeah, that does happen. But then at the end of the day, you have to ask yourself, so what? The sun still gets up, still get to wake up every day. No one's going to fire me. I own my own company. Our ecosystem's incredibly strong. We're loved by many people. People have tattoos with our logo on their bodies. So yeah, videos can certainly be used against you, and deep fakes are going to be a very, very tough thing for society to live through, and they're going to be brutal as we move into a post-truth economy. But I think this pendulum is going to swing the other direction, where outrage culture is going to burn itself out. Because you know what? If you're offended, it's probably not my problem. So suck it up, buttercup. You just got to deal with it. You just got to accept it. I get horrible things said about me every day. Look at my life. I love my life. It's great. And why can't you love yours? And why can't you have a good time? And they say, oh, but it's systemic. Society's holding me down. I'll tell you one of the most poignant things I've ever seen in my entire life. I went to Rwanda, and I went to Kigali, to the genocide museum there. And it's not only just a museum, it's a tomb. 250,000 people are buried there. And in 1994, 1.5 million people were killed in about 100 days. And probably the worst genocide that's ever happened, because it was a decentralized genocide. It wasn't just a small group of evil, twisted people who were indoctrinated for 20 years in a special club, and then they became monsters, and then they went and killed everybody. No, this was just neighbors killing neighbors. They flipped, they grabbed machetes, they just started chopping people up. They went next door, killed the kids, or killed the husband. The person who worked at the front desk of the museum was Hutu, and he killed I think it was the wife of the janitor upstairs. They worked together in the same building 20 years later. They have lunch together sometimes. They talk to each other sometimes. Think about that. A society where half the society attacks the other half, massacres children, mothers, husbands, grandparents, horrific things in the most inhuman way possible, finds a way to forgive and move on. And just say, for the sake of our children, and for the sake of the future of the country, and for the sake of just putting things back together, and so we don't end up in 25 years of perpetual civil war and poverty and chaos, we need to find a way to get along with each other. So when you have that as a real life example of what human beings are capable of doing, what the hell? Are your personal grievances so bad, and society treating you so badly, that you should carry a permanent chip on your shoulder and be less cheery and less happy than that particular person who has every reason to be basically angry for the rest of time, and his children angry for the rest of time? One of the superpowers of the human race is the ability to forgive and forget and move on. And it's something that I think we all need to really, really grow up and reevaluate, especially as we start moving into this post-truth economy. Charles, how's the treasury system coming along? Very good. We're starting to really scale up the team there. We're getting to a point where it's starting to leave the lab, and Bin Cheng has come up with some great ideas. And so I don't want to distract the Goguen and the Shelley teams, but it's the very next thing we're going to start working on as Shelley starts drawing down. Some guys are going to go to Hydra, and some guys are going to go to the treasury system. But I really want the treasury out, and we have some really good ideas of what to do there. And there's several papers we've written that got into NDSS, and we have a working prototype in Python that they've played around with for a bit. So there's some magic there. There's also some work we've been doing on the Snark side that may be useful for the anonymous voting protocol. They're using partial additive homomorphic encryption, and some of those primitives may be a bit heavy. So there might be some ways to optimize those. So more publications are coming, but that's an example of something just leaving the lab and entering into implementation, and we'll get it done. but it's got to be done in 2020. We will not leave Cardano as a project until the treasury is deployed and stable. So, the CIP process has to be good, voting has to look good, and then the treasury comes. And those are requirements before I can even consider leaving. So even if it slips, I'll spend my own money to keep it going until we get that out. So it's very, very important. Charles, have you ever read Steven Pinker? Yes, Enlightenment Now is a great book and actually makes you realize that things are getting better. Life is getting better. I'd encourage everybody to read that. If you run into any of these damn college kids, they got a little nose ring and they're postmodernists and they say, life is so horrible, everything's unfair, hierarchy, intersectional politics, postmodernism, give them a copy of that book and just watch them get super triggered. I love triggering people. Who'd win in sumo, you or Vitalik? Do you honestly have to ask that question? Come on, guys. I got like 100 pounds on Vitalik. I'd take him. Let's join forces with Dan Larimer, damn it. I don't know. Some things cannot be forgiven. All right, what else we got here? Come on, guys, give me some good questions. Say something nice about ETC. Yeah, ETC is still near and dear to my heart. I'd like to do something significant and meaningful there. And we're having right now a lot of internal conversations about what our future participation with ETC is going to be. So what we're going to do is we're going to probably submit a grant proposal to a collection of funding agencies that have committed capital to ETC. And we'll basically line out how much money it would take for us to build something very innovative. The reality is we have a lot of protocols that are sitting on the shelf that we could implement, put into Mantis, and I very strongly believe would make ETC a significantly better product than what Ethereum currently is on market and what Ethereum will be on market even after they get done with Casper. So it's the Ethereum Classic community's ultimate choice whether they want to go down that road or not. And if they don't, well, then, we've committed ourselves to building a client. We did that. And we were in the ecosystem for a long time uncompensated. And people have to realize that nothing is free. At some point, there has to be a business model that allows us to sustainably stay in, or else it's a donation. And, if you're an Ethereum Classic fan, you, for the rest of time, can use the client that we constructed to run the ecosystem. So we put our money where our mouth was, mission accomplished, and now we're moving on into the next phase. And the next phase is a proposal to dramatically improve the state of affairs. It will cost money to build, and it's up to the Ethereum Classic community whether they want to do that or not. And if they don't, well, then we're going to have to retire the client. We'll move that team on to bigger and brighter things. Interviewed VCs always talk about untested, lesser-known protocols like Dfinity and Tezos. I would differentiate Dfinity and Tezos. Tezos is certainly tested. It does have really good code, good community. Although their community does say horrific things about us, especially the Japanese arm of it, I will say that they're loyal to their founder. Dfinity hasn't, to my knowledge, released anything yet on market. They will at some point. As for VCs talking positively about them, because they took financial positions in these protocols. They've invested in them. So of course they're going to talk positively. If you invest in entrepreneur A over B, you're of course going to say A is better than B, even if it's objectively not. I don't get bothered by that. I do get bothered by organizations or media outlets that supposedly are objective just deciding to blacklist us and not cover us. And those organizations being perceived to be credible or objective in the space. We've had certainly very strong disagreements with CoinDesk, everything from simple things like an invitation to speak at Consensus to the fact that we've solved major problems like proof of stake and side chains, and these get zero coverage. We never get asked to comment on articles, even though in some cases the articles are directly involved in our business areas. And there's even apples to apples comparisons. Like, for example, the case of where we had we funded millions of dollars into setting up research labs at Tokyo Tech, University of Edinburgh, University of Athens, no coverage, but then the Stanford lab for Ethereum gets coverage. So one's newsworthy, the other one's not, even though we're doing the same things. And by the way, our paper volume is an order of magnitude higher, and our peer review success rate is significantly better. So the output of the labs we started is significantly better. The innovations of our labs is significantly better, yet somehow that's not worthy of even a basic stub. We're right now negotiating building a currency for 6 million people. I think it's probably the most significant event in the history of the cryptocurrency space if it gets through. There wasn't even any conversation or discussion about writing a potential article like they're doing something here. It's not newsworthy, apparently. So these are the kinds of things that deeply bother me, because it'd be one thing if it was like a consensus-owned media arm or something. Then I'd say, oh, okay, it's the competition's media, so that's why they're not covering us. But it is supposedly an objective publication, but it's not. Nixon had his issues with the New York Times. I have my issues with CoinDesk. Abe has his issues with Asahi. Everybody has their favorite publication that they don't feel is giving them a fair shake. That said, these organizations are significantly less meaningful than media was even 10 years ago. At any time, I can go to Twitter and 100,000 people read it. We have 50,000+ people on our Reddit. There's tens of thousands of people on Telegram. These AMAs routinely get thousands, if not tens of thousands of views. So as a consequence, it's like we don't really need somebody to write an article about us to get a message across. And frankly, we're in markets that they're not. We get all the time national press in Ethiopia and Mongolia and other places. I'm going to Georgia. We're probably going to have all the media represented there and be in their top tier publications all throughout the Russian speaking world. So do we really care? No. There's an old saying, the dog barks, the caravan moves on. Charles, would you consider going vegan? Clean body and mind would make you even more genius. I'm a big fan of the ketogenic diet. When I follow it, I feel really, really good, and I feel a lot healthier, and there's tons of great things written about it. Veganism, vegetarianism is an interesting thing. It doesn't make evolutionary sense to me. The reality is that we were a hunter-gatherer culture, and we would scavenge whatever we could come up with. But it seems to me like the body, because food is scarce, would likely be by default in a ketogenic state, and that we would metabolize glucose only when that was available to us. So there are certainly ways to be in ketosis while eating vegetables and plants and these things, but it's a heck of a lot harder than eating meat products. And I think there's a conflation of the ethics of the consumption of meat from the biological reality of that. Life is tough. Things kill other things. Going to Africa teaches you that when you see a lion eat something. It's really a horrific sight. But that's how the world has worked since before any of us were here, and after we're all gone, and will continue to work this way. I just say just follow the science, follow common sense, think about things from an evolutionary perspective, and the ketogenic side of things just makes more sense. That said, it's harder to follow than you'd think, especially when you live life on the go. One of the reasons why I'm trying to travel less is because I do want to get healthy. Before I started all my businesses, I weighed about 180, 190 pounds. I felt great, exercised reasonably every day, and now I'm about 235. Gained a lot of weight, and stomach's not as good as it used to be. Gallbladder is not as good as it used to be. There's a lot of issues there. They're getting better, and there's a lot of great knowledge, and I have good doctors and good nutritionists. It's just a matter of consistency to solve that. So the key for me being healthy is to stay in one place for long enough to actually commit to something and be able to follow it through. If I have to keep traveling, it probably will kill me. I love it. I just say I should stop traveling. And then James says, Charles, could you swing through London to attend to do a keynote at the Crypto AM event on June 25th? It's at Smith and Walensky, so steak and red wine are plenty. Sometimes I think people don't actually listen to things I say. Did you ever meet the real Satoshi Nakamoto? Nakamoto's gone. By the way, another thing that's coming is lab-grown meat, and that'll be here in the next 25 years. And then, there can be ethical consumption of meat products. And then it really will force the issue. The other issue I have with people in the vegan category is they just have this damn moral superiority over everybody else. It's like, oh, I'm just trying to be part of the solution, not the problem, brah. And I'm like, just get off of yourself. Come on, brah. Bulletproof coffee is great, and I do drink bulletproof. That's very nice. And actually, you're right. Keto is not maintainable in the long term, so you have to have something like the slow carb diet or things like that. And Michael Lesser is actually an expert on anti-aging because he's a doctor who studies this stuff. The resveratrol is great. The only problem is bioavailability. When you take supplements, they don't absorb very well, so you have to get it from other sources. And intermittent fasting is great. There's a doctor who has written a lot about it. His name is Dr. Fung, and he's a nephrologist based in Canada who went to UCLA. And he wrote a nice book on intermittent fasting. My experience, the easiest one to maintain is the 16-8 fast, where you don't eat for 16 hours, and then you eat for an 8-hour window. And that's usually like 12 p.m. to 8 p.m. That's a good window. And just skipping breakfast, or you can do a fat fast for breakfast, like drink some bulletproof coffee and move your way through. Another thing I've recently started taking is apple cider vinegar. Really good stuff. Really good stuff. Humans won't be here in 25 years. That's probably true. We'll be some sort of non-human entity. What do you think of mushroom decriminalization in Colorado? It's another interesting question. So I'll preface this by saying that anyone interested in this topic should read Michael Pollan's book. It'll come to me in a moment. I read it on Kindle. Great book. And it basically talks about psychedelics, their history starting from the discovery of LSD in the 50s, all the way through the 60s and the golden age, to the decriminalization movement, to the gradual decriminalization. And you'll find out that mushrooms in particular, psilocybe mushrooms, have been studied for, I think, over 10 years out of Johns Hopkins. They actually have a group there. And they really, How to Change Your Mind, that's the name of the book. and they work really wonders on treatment of end-of-life issues, depression, or generally speaking, people that suffer from anxiety. And there's a whole corpus of research that's coming out of that. They're not habit forming, and there's just no evidence that they actually have substantial negative consequences for normal, healthy people who consume them in the right environment. Set and setting are a hugely important thing. But I'd defer to Michael Pollan's book. I'd also highly recommend reading Paul Stament's stuff. He's an expert in mycology, and he talks about these things, and he even has a lot of patents. And honestly, it's just about a way of using your brain differently and thinking about things differently. And they provide a way of looking at the world that potentially is advantageous to people who get caught in thought patterns that can have negative consequences. That said, it's one of those things where it's being gradually reintroduced to the medical community, just like CBD and THC is being. And the problem with that is that we actually don't know where the boundaries are. And the hallmark of allopathic medicine was that we started using a science-based approach. And we said, okay, we understand that all these things could have positive health consequences, but let's concede that they also could have negative health consequences. And perhaps they only work for you because metabolically you're different than Bob or Alice. So let's study these things with controlled groups and double-blind studies, and let's over time through clinical trial try to get a separation of placebo and fiction from fact. The challenge is that this process is political, and the two areas where it's really impacted society the most, I'd say, is on the ketogenic diet as well as the use of psychedelics. Because in both cases, these things got politicized unnecessarily by a small minority of decision makers in the 60s and 70s. And as a consequence, it's resulted in basically these topics becoming taboo for several decades. And it's only by the heroic actions of many people have we been able to bring these things back into the foresight, and by the emergence of Joe Rogan and the internet and the intellectual dark web and instantaneous flow of communication. And over time, these things will open up, and we'll now be able to apply proper science to them and figure out where the boundaries are and what is good and what's not so good. The other thing is that the tools that we have to run experiments are considerably better. We can actually look at people's genes. We can actually take significantly more sophisticated labs and other things at a much lower cost than we could a generation ago. So these things will come, and we'll be in a good position within the next 20 or 30 years. So I think the decriminalization is a great thing. It's just insane to arrest people for possessing psychedelics. Doesn't harm anybody, and frankly, it's just a counterculture, a reactionary of society, against hippies in the 60s and 70s, and the people who made those decisions are long dead, and it's a good thing that they're out of power, and it's good to go back. Keto is just bad science. Yeah, sure it is. Sure it is. Okay. Atala is already built, and it's built in Scala. It's great. Keto is crap. Fasting is the ultimate healing tool in constructive fasting. When you're fasting, you're actually in ketosis. Your glucose stores go away very quickly, and the only thing that you can metabolize at that point is your proteins and your fat, and the proteins get converted to glucose through a process called gluconeogenesis, and the ketone bodies get absorbed, and that's okay. I love people. Charles, what sightseeing did you do in Mongolia? I went to Karakoram, and then I also went to the Gobi Desert, and I stayed at the ruins of Karakoram, which was just a phenomenal experience. I mean, that place was pretty magical because 800 years ago, it was the place to be. Just like New York City was the place to be right at the turn of the 19th, 20th century, or if it was the 18th to 19th century, London was the place to be. Karakoram was just absolutely amazing. Talk with leading cardiologists who study diets as much as CEO for IHK. They all disagree with what you're saying. Sure they do. Yeah, and they also tell you to take statins too when people don't need to take it. And all right. Well, anyway, Karakoram. And so wonderful place to go. It's like nothing is there. There's just some walls. But 800 years ago, it was really the seat of power of the Mongol Empire, which probably had more land mass than any other empire in the world. And it was just a magical place. First, there was free religion, which was almost unheard of in that time period, where they had Taoists and Buddhists and Muslims and all kinds of interesting people there. They even had this one fountain, they say, that actually had alcohol, free-flowing alcohol, where basically they'd connect it and it would just, beer would come out of it or whatever they had. And people just come by with mugs and drink as much as they wanted, because the Mongols had so much money from conquering the world, they could afford to pay for these public work systems. And it all just got swept away within 2 centuries, which is just an incredible thought, to think you could build this gargantuan empire, you could conquer anybody, get rid of anybody, but then somehow 200 years later, it's gone. And so it was real fun to stay in a ger nearby there. And also the Gobi Desert was a lot of fun to see as well. I rode a camel around and climbed up some sand dunes, rolled down some sand dunes, and that's one of the highlights of the job, is when you can take a little bit of time off, because we had a meeting with the president, but we had a kind of a glide day in between. So we just drove down, stayed overnight, and then came back and met with the president. When you have those little windows to actually take those things, that's what makes the job really interesting. And speaking of which, doctors disagreeing with something, at one point, being a homosexual was actually an illness. If you look at the old DSM, medical knowledge changes. And I think there's just not a lot of science to back up this idea that consumption of a high-fat diet will directly lead to heart disease. I think inflammation has for heart disease in the 50s. It fits the data far better than consumption of fat diets, because the diets didn't change between the 1930s and the 1950s, but there's a huge surge in the amount of people smoking. Why? Because all the soldiers smoked, and they went home, and then their family members smoked. The smoking rates went up considerably. We had this thing called World War II. What else do we have? And yeah, there is actually peer-reviewed science supporting ketosis as well. You just choose to ignore it. Look at Dom D'Agostino or Peter Attia, for example, where he actually cites numerous studies. He's a doctor. Dom is a PhD researcher at University of Florida. So it's not ubiquitous. You're talking about mushrooms and drugs. Like, what does this mean for the Cardano project? You're disgracing the integrity of the project. The roadmap has been pushed back several times. You're a phony, big fat phony. Sometimes the high sugars will kill you. Sometimes I think that people just say these things to have fun. Reese is watching and loves you. How's the project with the Greek university goes? That was done with GRNet. It completed, and I think they're actually using it in production. We're still doing great research at a University of Athens. We have an office in Athens. It's a beautiful office. And I try to go out there every 3 to 6 months. Yeah, I love Greece. I've been all throughout Greece, Corfu and Mykonos and so forth. Kalimata. Any thoughts on the Microsoft Identity overlay on Bitcoin? It made a hell of a lot of sense. The thing about Microsoft choosing to deploy on Bitcoin is it was a great example of making the least controversial decision you can make. So you say, we need to anchor what we're doing to something in the open public realm. If you do Ethereum, that's a bit political. If you do Bitcoin, no one's going to complain. And there was enough juice in Bitcoin to permit Microsoft's use case, and all the magic happens off chain. So I think it's a great step forward for the entire industry. What's particularly nice is it's an embrace of the DID standard from the W3C, the decentralized identifier, and that's super important for self-sovereign identity. So it's incredibly encouraging to see a company that historically has been not a friend of open source and not a friend of standards to embrace standards and to give some political cover for large companies to come on in and do something. There's a lot of other things like the Sovereign Foundation and Hyperledger Indy, and I'd highly encourage people to look at the Digital Identity Foundation. It's called DIF, and also read the W3C's DID standard if they're curious about where the identity space is at. And frankly, if you're planning on building a product that involves identity, I highly recommend you just fork Hyperledger Indy and just play around with it for a month. And that in itself would give you more information than any book can about where are we at in the space. And it's really nice. And no, vaccination doesn't cause autism. That's just bad science. Let's see what else we have here. Quantum resistance. We're working on it. We have Peter Schwabe on that, and Alex Russell is also working on it. There's been a lot of discussions about what the best way of doing it's going to be. More likely than not, it'll be a checkpoint that we put at the end of each epoch using some form of a post-quantum key. So either a lattice or hash-based crypto. We're looking at hash-based crypto, XMSS, and some modifications. Sphinx are two ideas that we've seen. That's a good step one. But then the next step is to actually look at a quantum adversary and then kind of model what a quantum adversary can do and then write some sort of proof that we're resistant to a quantum adversary. The challenge is that a lot of the cryptographic primitives, like everything that goes into these snarks or everything that goes into a VRF or a VDF, are vulnerable to quantum computers. And so there's really hard to make these things quantum resistant, or if you do so at a tremendous cost. So while we kind of have an easy way of handling the public key crypto side, that's just using a post-quantum crypto primitive, it's a lot harder when you talk about more sophisticated cryptography that's built on assumptions like discrete log or the hardness of integer factorization or something like that. So anyway, we're looking into it. We'll publish a paper at some point. I'm trying real hard to get that out. They told me it could come out in January, and the problem with this, or things get just busy, and we missed a window, and then everybody was just getting ready for crypto and Eurocrypt and CCS submission deadlines, and so they just put everything aside to finish their stuff. So now that stuff is over, we're basically getting back to it. But even if we had a perfect design, it would be one of those things we'd implement after Shelley came out. So it wasn't a mission critical thing, which is why I didn't react too hostilely to this stuff. With all the money you have, why would you buy a Cadillac? Because the Cadillac CT6 2019 is the finest car ever made. It's just amazing. It's got a twin turbo V6 in it, 400 horsepower. I have a 10-speed transmission, 4-wheel steering like the Nissan Skyline. It's got the Magna-Ride suspension system. Everything is just automatic. It's got super sophisticated sensors. I got the Super Cruise. It drives itself, and it's like $50,000 cheaper than an equivalent Mercedes-Benz S-Class. And when I take it to a mechanic, I can take it to a GM dealership and have it fixed. Whereas if I had a Benz, I could not do that. Think it through. I need a Benz S63 AMG coupe. Now, if you're going to get a coupe, well, then get a proper sports car. Don't just buy a coupe. And no, CT6 is amazing. Charles, are you looking at an integrated solar battery 24/7 power scenario for the miniature staking pools that are being built? The Rock Pi boards that Marcus put together actually had a battery system on them, and we did a demo where we showed that you could use a solar cell to charge that. The challenge is if you're that far off the grid, how would you get internet connectivity? So there is an open question of could we rent some satellite spectrum and then use that to actually have a relay system like what Blockstream has been exploring, and what would be the cost incurred of that? That's kind of a 2020 thing, not a 2019 thing. The first step is just to get a stake pool running and then get it at a very low cost point. And then at the next step would be saying, well, let's build an ecosystem around that. And we definitely have talked a lot with certain people about what would it look like and how much money would it cost us to have alternative internet for these things. The IoT project that we're doing in Mongolia may actually help us with stake pool operation that uses something out of the normal internet because we're using L'Oreal protocol there. And no, I don't have a DeLorean. Better than a Tesla Model S with ludicrous speed? Nothing is faster than a Tesla Model S with ludicrous speed. That's like Aventador level in a sedan. You can't beat a battery powered car for acceleration. But within 10, 20 years, all these cars are going to be hybrids and they're going to have battery acceleration because you get maximum torque at 0 RPM. And I will give you the Lexus they have amazing sedans as well. Used to have an RX and that was great. I liked the R8 until they did the redesign after 2012, and it was like, yeah. The old 2008 design was beautiful because we all saw Iron Man and we said, wow, that was just the car to have. Is ADA in the New World Order? Well, if it was, then CoinDesk would cover us. We get better press coverage. That's how you know when they're not talking. Let's find something. Do you hang with MJ? Is that Michael Jordan? Michael Jackson? Bob Sacramento? Wind tractor. Yes, I do have a John Deere. You got it now. Let's see here. Hi, Charles. I'm an artist and an investor. Cardano. How would I go about showing your team some of my paintings and sculpture, my art? Talk about the history, computer tech, and social media. We're always interested in that. So just send me a tweet and link to some way of contacting you. And what I'll do is follow you. You can PM me some stuff, and I'll put you in contact with our director of design, Richard Wild. And we'd love to see your portfolio. That's actually how we did the artwork for the posters that we did for the IWHK Summit. Came from somebody we saw over Twitter, and we said, wow, that's really cool. Charles, is a rollback of the Bitcoin blockchain possible? Yes, it is theoretically possible. Is it likely? No. And the price you see is a reflection of that lack of likeliness. Have you heard if OpenBazaar will add ADA to its accepted cryptos? At some point we'll probably do that. Actually, I think Dionysus Zindros worked on OpenBazaar, and we have some people at IOHK Research that are contributing to that particular project. So we're friends with them. They're good people. CEO is not a bad dude. It's a good project, and so there's no reason we can't work together. It's just one